going to read a poem from this collection called A Journal of Enlightened Panic, which is my most recent one from Shoestring Press. The poem is called The Right, and I want to read this one because it's like a statement of what I think about poetry, really. So here it is. It's called The Right. There is a physicality to some texts, be they stories or dialogues, songs or speeches, prayers or ritual chants, that might encourage you, the reader, to mouth the words. And mouthing the words might create an inner sound that takes on a life of its own, aside from literal meaning. And I wonder whether this might be more at one with laughter or weeping or wordless expressions of love, more like hunger or joy, the exhilaration of being buffeted by a gale on a hillside, or the heaviness of sleep after climbing that hill. Like the feeling of emptiness when words, sound contradict sense, as if they'd been making small talk, putting you and me at ease, before suddenly asking an awkward question. And I wonder also whether you have to answer, being after all a guest who has a right to silence.
Oh, that was really thought-provoking. I'm probably going to go silent for 5 minutes now while I think it over. I mean, you've obviously thought really hard about what poetry does and what poetry means and what it means to the writer and to the reader.
Yes, I have. I've thought about it, as you can imagine, a lot over many years, really. And I guess when you think about something or you're preoccupied with something, then it comes out in poetry kind of almost automatically, really. So I didn't really have to think too much about writing that poem. It just came quite quickly. But that's because I've thought so much about it before, if you see what I mean.
So when and how did you first know that you were a poet, a writer?
Okay. Yeah, well, I'm glad you said a poet or a writer, because I kind of don't think I've ever thought of myself as a writer. I kind of think that the type of poetry I write, and I suppose most contemporary poets write, is lyric poetry. And I always think of creating a lyric poem is more like composing a piece of music than it is writing. And I kind of think of it more in those terms, really. I think of it more as making something. It's to do with the sound of words and the rhythm of the voice. And yeah, you've got to write it down to record it. But so yeah, anyway, to come back to your question. Yeah, well, maybe it's a bit of, I don't know, it's a bit unusual, but for me, it was two separate occasions. So when I was a teenager, when I was about 16 years old, I decided I wanted to be a poet. And that came out of listening to song lyrics. So I was a kid in the 1960s, and I've got two older brothers who were like teenagers and young adults in the 60s. So they kind of bought all this music and blasted it out in our living room on the little turntable. And it was people like Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen and the Beatles and Hendrix and Joni Mitchell and all that. And I just kind of absorbed all this music as a kid. And the thing that really got to me about it was the words, the lyrics. And there's a band called Cream, which some of the older listeners might be familiar with. So it's, Clapton and Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker. And they had a lyricist called Pete Brown. And I distinctly remember hearing this lyric, which was, and the rainbow had a beard. And, just a basic bit of surrealist, nothing special, but for me, it really kind of struck me. And so I thought, I want to try doing that. So I did. So I started writing poetry and wrote reams and reams, none of which has survived, luckily. And I decided that was what I wanted to do, was be a poet. And I thought that the way to be a poet was to go to university and study English literature. But unfortunately, that never happened. So just due to various circumstances. So I didn't go to university, and to this day, I don't have a degree. And I kind of forgot about wanting to be a poet and did other things. And I still was always very interested in poetry, and I was really into Linton Kwesi Johnson and Benjamin Zephaniah. I was really into reggae in the late 70s, early 80s. So I listened to those two a lot. So that's the first time, and then it kind of happened again later in life. So when I was in my late 20s, I kind of discovered again that I wanted to be a poet, and I distinctly remember when it happened. It was so again, my eldest brother. He lived in Sunderland for most of his life, and I was at the pub with him. Came back to his house, and he said, "Oh, I've discovered this new poet," and he got out a vinyl LP and put it on, and it was the Northumbrian poet Basil Bunting reading his long poem Brick Flats, and I was just completely bowled over by that. I thought it was fantastic, and he had like a Northumbrian accent, and he was talking about places in Northumberland that I knew. I thought, oh, I'd like to try that, and so that started me off writing poetry again. And from then on, I have kind of thought of myself as a poet, really. And that was in the 1980s, I suppose, late 1980s.
That really kind of ties in with what you were saying about poetry being more like music, because
Yeah,
Basil Bunting is very, his poetry is very musical, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things he said was that the words on the page are just like a musician's score, they're just there to tell you how to sound it. And I think in that recording, he was reading it with some background music, Scarlatti. So yeah, you're right. Yeah, and I think that was a big influence right from the start.
Yeah.
From him, I discovered other poets. Like he led me to Ezra Pound and the kind of modernists and the imagists and all that. So yeah, all started the ball rolling.
Yeah. So what kind of thing are you writing at the moment?
Well, I've just had 3 titles published in the last kind of 18 months, 2 years. So I'm kind of in between stuff at the moment, like an actor in between jobs, not unemployed. And yeah, I'm always writing stuff in notebooks, and so that always an ongoing activity. And I've just written a group of poems called a group of odes. So that's a type of poem. Basil Bunting, in fact, wrote a book of odes. So I've written a bunch of poems in that form. One of them was published by Andrew Taylor on his M58 magazine, but the others are unpublished. I don't know if they're any good, but that's what I'm working on at the moment. Yeah,
that's kind of harking back to the sort of older poetic tradition, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's right. Well, I go back to classical Greece, but then that form has been used right up until, well, people like Frank O'Hara and Allen Ginsberg wrote odes, so it's continue being updated. So yeah, I like to kind of think about form, and so I wrote the Riverrun was a book of sonnets, but they're obviously not traditional sonnets, they're kind of modernist sonnets. So I like to have a form. I like to take language and kind of it's like pouring it into a mold, so you have this form which holds the language together. That's what I tried to do.
I love that image. I'll have to think about that. Anyway, sorry. So you're a publisher as well as a poet. You publish for Leafe Press. Well, you are Leafe Press, basically. Can you say something about the press and about how the 2 roles interact with each other?
Yeah, well, first of all, I must say it's a very small scale press. So, I'm a micro press. And, there are other publishers like me who do things on a much bigger scale and publish more stuff. So I don't make any great claims for it. But yeah, it's been quite important to me over the years. And I've been running Leafe Press for 20 years now, which is hard to believe. But, and yeah, I think in the early days, I started it before most people had PCs or printers at home. So I did have them at home because I worked in IT. And so I was able to do it all pretty much myself. So I'd print the covers on cards and print the pages and fold them and staple them and design the covers. And that I kind of missed all that really, because that felt like a collaborative effort. It felt like you were collaborating with the poet to produce something, this artifact. So yeah, that was, and I don't get that so much now with print on demand. It's a bit more kind of clinical, really. But yeah, I think the press is important because I think as a poet, you can't be writing stuff all the time or working on stuff all the time. So something like a publishing operation gives you keeps you in touch with the poetry world while you may not be writing much yourself at that time. I think it also kind of makes you look at the work as an editor and publisher. So it helps you to see your own work in that way as well, and it's going to understand how other people see your work. So it's been quite valuable in that respect, really.
It's kind of win-win, isn't it? It's,
yeah, plus it's put me in touch with lots of poets who have, you know, that's been quite a privilege really, to work with people whose work I really admire, you know, like Lee Harwood and Geraldine Monk, and well, all the poets are published really, but some of them have been quite influential. So that's quite good.
Yeah, I mean, for a micro press, it's certainly well thought of. So, you know, you're obviously doing something right. So it I guess it kind of helps to build up a writing community around yourself, to have that aspect to your writing life, your publishing life.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. I think community is a big. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, carry on.
I was just saying, I think you're right. I think for me, community is a really important part of what I do and why I do it, really, and it has been for quite a long time. So as well as the press, and there's the online magazine Litter, which is associated with it. But yeah, I have lots of poets who have become personal friends, and I also can have kind of correspondences really with poets, which last for, you know, quite extensive and last quite a long time. Email correspondences, and I just find that really really important. You know, I think there's a kind of supportive kind of network there of people who publish or get published, or, you know, or collaborate with other people's work, and yeah, that's quite important to me. And in terms of the email correspondence, I've been conducting, there's an American poet called John Bloomberg Risman, and I've been corresponding with him for the best part of 20 years now. And that's, you know, quite significant really. So it's had a big influence on me. I kind of hope I've had some influence on him as well. But, and yeah, a lot of my knowledge of American poetry has come from John really. So those kind of networks are really important.
And that's the sort of network and the sort of community that hasn't really been affected this year, I guess, by COVID-19 and lockdown and that sort of thing.
No, it hasn't. Yeah, you're right. Oh, I think yeah, because of the type of art form it is, it's been able to kind of continue, and that obviously a lot of art forms haven't, you know, like theatre and so on. So we're the kind of lucky ones really, but it has continued. And in some ways, like you were saying about Five Leaves Bookshop, in some ways it's not been an improvement, but it's had its benefits, because you can now give a poetry reading online, and you get people attending from, you know, all over the country or other countries, and so those contacts are kind of growing in that respect. And I've actually made contact with people who I haven't been in touch with for quite a long time, just by chatting to them on Zoom and then following that up on Skype and so on. So yeah, it's quite strange how it's worked out.
Has it had any effect on your actual writing practice, your poetry?
I wouldn't say it's had an effect on me practice, the way I do things. I'm sure it will affect what I write. I think, you know, it's such a huge event, you know, that you couldn't possibly not be affected by it as a writer or an artist of some kind. It's just that you don't know how it's going to affect you. Yeah, and I think, you know, with poetry, it works on a kind of subconscious level. So you're often not aware of the things which are preoccupying you, and you're not quite sure what will come out in your poetry sometimes. So I'm sure that the pandemic, it's like, what was it? Some Mao Zedong said about the French Revolution. It's too early to say what the effect will be, but it will come out, I think, in what I write, because you can't not be affected by an event like this, can you? It's so huge. I think you say the same about climate change. You know, that has kind of come out in quite a lot of what I've written in recent years, and I didn't really intend that to happen, but you know, it's just it's such an important thing that we all have to face up to. It's bound to have some effect and kind of come out in your writing.
Yeah, and I guess COVID is kind of a bigger, more immediate, well, probably not a bigger disaster, but certainly a more immediate disaster with, you know, many more immediate effects. So
Yeah.
We're going to have even, yeah. That'll be interesting to see what comes out, you know, to look back in a couple of years' time and see how it has affected the sort of writing that's getting published.
Yeah, I think it'll take a while for it to become apparent, because I suppose there's different ways you can write about it. I mean, you can choose it as an issue and decide to write about it as an issue, sort of thing, which is probably not a good idea, really. I would say, but other people write about it as a form of therapy, really, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. You know, fully support anyone who does that. But there's also the kind of subconscious effects that you know, we don't know how it's going to affect people. And, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what comes out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the best poems I've seen that have come out of it so far have been ones that address the feelings and the thoughts that you have without being directly about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. One of the best poems that I've seen is by a poet called Cliff Yates, and he wrote a poem called Dog, I think it is, and it's just about a stray dog wandering through a deserted city during lockdown, and it's quite a moving poem, and it doesn't actually mention the pandemic or mention what the issue, but it's obvious that that's what it's about, so to speak, and yeah, indirectly, it's very interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I mean, talking about you've talked a bit about poets who've inspired you over the years. Is there would you say there's maybe one or two poets or other people, you know, people in any walk of life who've inspired your poetry or you in the way that you write?
Well, yeah, that's quite a difficult question because there's so many, really. And in terms of poets, there are so many poets who I admire. I wouldn't kind of know where to start, really. Too close to it, I think. So I can't really answer it in terms of poets because lots of poets who I admire in terms of their work and their practice, and the way they do things and the way they live their lives, and equally lots who I admire the actual work they produce. But I'm not going to say anything about poets because I won't want to pick one out, and I might upset people anyway if I miss them out. But yeah, I'm very inspired by small press publishers. Being one in a very small scale myself, when I see what other people do, which is on a so much bigger scale, yeah, I don't know how they do it. You know, people like Tony Fraser at Shearsman or Alec Newman at Nice Forks and Spoons. So those people really inspire me because they're kind of working for other people, really. And if I had to pick out one person, I'm going to pick out someone who will almost certainly never watch this video, so I'm not going to be embarrassed by it.
I can guess so.
It's the publisher, John Lucas, yeah, and who, you know, in life, I've always liked to have someone who's older than me, who I think, you know, when I'm their age, I'd like to be like them. And of course, I'm getting to a point where it's quite hard to find people who are that much older than me. And I look at John, I think, yeah, if I can have his energy and enthusiasm for other people, you know, and what I'm impressed about John is his generosity of spirit, you know, and he is a kind of eminent professor, critic, poet, but he just treats everybody like as an equal, and kind of I like that generosity. So if I had to pick one person, I would pick him as a kind of representative, really, of all those publishers and editors out there who are kind of putting their energies into other people's work. So.
And I remember one time we were driving down to States of Independence, and my daughter was sitting in the back. She was about 15 at the time. She'd come to help us out, and John was sitting next to her. And they talked the whole way. You know, John was so interested and interesting that he really engaged her in conversation. And that,
yeah, well,
that's
great
stuck with
conversation.
me. He's just,
Yeah.
you know, like you say.
Yeah. And he's always got an anecdote.
Yeah.
And he never seems to repeat anecdotes. There's always new ones, you know.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he plays the cornet.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I agree. John Lucas is very inspiring. So what are you most proud of in your writing career?
Well, that's a really interesting question. So I suppose I ought to say it's one of my poetic works or the whole works or whatever. But strangely enough, I don't really feel like that. It's kind of weird. I feel like poetry is something that happens by accident almost. I don't feel like I'm always in control of what I produce. And I sometimes even think I can't really take credit for it. It's a weird, I don't know if other poets feel like this or whether it's just me, but I kind of, I do feel that way already. And I feel like, I sometimes feel like I might never write another poem, you know. It's like a form of grace, you know. And so I can't really say I'm proud of my poetry. Once a poem is published and it goes out there, I feel somehow getting dissociated from it, you know, as if someone else had written it. It's a strange thing. So I'm very glad that all that poetry I've written exists and it's somehow associated with me. But I would have to probably pick something else to say I was proud of. I mean, I'm quite proud of the translations that I've done from French. So I've translated 2 books of poetry from French. And one thing about translation and languages generally is the more work you put in, the better the result. And that's not the case with poetry. It's like, in fact, the more work you put in, the worse it can be sometimes. So I'm pleased with them, and they were kind of, again, in one particular case, it felt like a collaborative effort, really. And I'm also kind of proud of Leafe Press, although again, I don't make any great claims for it, but yeah, I'm glad that Leafe Press exists, and I feel like it's something worthwhile that I've done. So they're the things I would pick out, really. But the poetry, yeah, I don't know. I have a strange relationship with my own work.
Yeah, it's not that unusual, actually.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm glad.
Well, certainly.
Well, you write poetry, Pippa. So do you feel the same about your?
Yeah, I do. I kind of do, actually. Yeah.
You understand.
And once it's there, it kind of feels. Yeah, you get the dissociation, don't you? Yeah. Hadn't really thought about it before. When you were translating, you said it was a collaboration. Did you actually work with the poets?
Well, in one case, yeah, I translated work by the Moroccan poet Abdellatif Laâbi, who writes in French and lives in Paris. And so I was, I can't say I collaborated with him at all, but I sent him the translation and he came back with some comments and we had a bit of a discussion about it. So I can't say it was collaboration, but given that he's such a kind of heroic figure, really. I don't know if you have a life story, but he was a dissident in Morocco in the 1960s. He served time in prison and he was exiled to France. And so just to have some kind of connection with someone like that was quite a privilege, really. So yeah, that
sounds like it was a fascinating process. I mean, I'd just be I'd be interested in seeing whether I could do it. You know, I doubt if I could do it well, but whether I could do it, and I can understand you being proud that you've done it. It makes a lot of sense because it's not easy to express someone else's words.
Yeah, it is a strange thing. It's part way between actually just turning what they did into a different language, but then it's partly about creating something new in the target language. Yeah, so it's that thing about poetry can't be translated. I think to a degree that's true. So you can. So yeah, it's a really interesting process and good for you as a writer, I think, to go through that.
Yeah, I should have to have a go. So, last question: what do you hope to achieve in the future?
I don't know. I've got no idea. I don't really have any plans for the future. I never have. Not in life generally, but it's certainly in terms of poetry. In terms of Leafe Press, I just kind of generally bring out a couple of titles a year, and I just kind of focus on those ones, and then I never think about what will come next, and just see what crops up, really. And in terms of the poetry, again, I think it comes back to this thing that I don't feel in complete control of it. So yeah, I just get interested in a particular project or in a particular type of language or a particular poetic form, and I just see where that goes, really. And sometimes it goes somewhere, sometimes it's a dead end, and if that's a dead end, you try something else. And that's the way it goes. And so I work on that basis really, and fortunately over time I have actually constructed a body of work which seems to have some coherence. But yeah, I don't really plan into. I suppose again it's to do with lyric poetry and the fact that it's a little bit different. If you're writing a big narrative poem or an epic, which some poets are at the moment, like Alice Notley, the American poet, writes epics. So she thought that women were excluded from the traditional epic, and she wanted to write them, you know, in our time. So I suppose if you're doing something like that, maybe you've got to sit down and plan it, and it's a long-term project. But yeah, the stuff that I do is a bit different to that.
So, you said earlier on, you know, when you publish something, you dissociate from it, and you might never write another poem. Would that bother you if you?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it would. But because I quite like being thought of as someone who writes poetry.
fair enough. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it has to come from inside you as well. You know, it has to be a sort of internal need to almost, or certainly an interest in playing with words and finding out where they go.
Absolutely, yeah, and I do it all the time. Yeah, and I think it's a bit of it's a false kind of fear. You know, the American poet Kenneth Coke wrote a long poem called "The Art of Poetry," which is very, very kind of entertaining. And one of the things he says in that is, you think you might lose your gift, but you probably won't. So don't worry about it. You know, it doesn't really happen. So I find quite reassuring.
Okay. Well, thank you ever so much. It's been really, really nice talking to you.
Yeah, you too, Pippa.
Quite like to follow up some of the things that have come up at some point. So do you have a reading to read us out with, please?
Yeah, I'm going to read a couple of poems from this book, Riverrun, which is a book of sonnets about the River Trent, mainly in its Nottinghamshire stretch. So the two poems I'm going to read are, because I'm talking to 5 Leaves Books in Nottingham, I'm going to read a couple of poems specifically related to Nottingham. So this is the first one. Where is Nottingham's river? It's under the ring road flyover, or meandering out of town through urban blight fields. It has no mouth or delta, no loud falls or famous wharves, just a Midland Water Company warehouse and a ferry no one ever sees, with no important destination, only stability that underpinned industries and arable production, hydrology dictating erosion and deposition, and I've had enough of its silences and enigmatic moods. And the second one is particularly because I'm talking to 5 Leaves Bookshop. From the river to St Anne's Well and Radford Road, always a boundary when enclosure came. Later, the loom breakers, radical bookshops, old stories of picket lines and pensions funded by scratch cards and lottery tickets. And the Trent had freedom to roam, gathered and guided, a tapestry of May month meadows, as if we could all fleet the time carelessly, through the river's industry a golden age. Maybe it will come again.